Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight and for donating to the Gordon Parks Foundation. We're really excited to have raised some good funds tonight and excited to have our guest. Please welcome Jason Lee, film photographer, actor, director, producer, and former professional skateboarder.
Hello.
Thanks, Jason, for being here tonight and for all your generosity with everything and helping us raise some great funds for Gordon Parks.
Thank you for having me. And I'll start by saying, hi, Mom. I think my mom's tuned in from Northern California.
That is awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Hi, Jason. I'm here. I'm here, but I'm going to, I do enough Zoom meetings during the day. I'm going to mute myself and take myself off of video.
Nice to meet you. Thank you
Nice
for joining us.
Love you, son. Congratulations.
Thanks, Mom. That's so sweet.
Bye. Let me just get off of here.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I guess we go ahead and kick off the slideshow, Steve, when you get a chance, and we'll get ready to check out some of Jason's work.
Mm-hmm. I hope everybody's having a great night, wherever you may be.
So we're starting with Polaroids, and this is one of your first projects, right? When you first started out as a photographer?
Yeah, I had a studio space in downtown LA. I was shooting a lot of pack film Polaroid 3 1/4 by 4 1/4. I had a Mamiya RZ67 medium format camera, and back then you could get all kinds of pack film. Polaroid was making it very consistently, and it was very popular, and you could get it anywhere. And I really loved the tones of the black and white Polaroid film. And I was curious if Polaroid made bigger film, and I found out that they did. So I went from pack film all the way to 8x10. And so I was doing a lot of studio work, portraiture, and in those early studio days. And then I decided to take the big Polaroids out on the road with me. And so I had a Polaroid processor, which plugs in. It's a kind of special process for the bigger Polaroid films, and discovered that to take the big films out on the road, I would have to have a hand crank manual processor. So I got one of those, and I had an SUV at the time, and I had a clothesline in the back. And I just kind of set out on the road in California with a bunch of boxes of the big Polaroid film, my 8x10 camera, and just started making exposures for the first time with that film outside of a studio setting, a controlled lighting kind of situation. And that was my first time kind of documenting the landscape. And it happened to be with the large format Polaroid films, which I absolutely loved a lot. And so, this is, I found these people waiting for the bus in downtown LA, and I asked if I could take their photos with the big 8x10 Polaroid films. Her name was Vera. And, you know, like most people do, they were kind of tripped out by the big camera. And why is there a guy at a bus stop with a big old antique 8x10 camera? This guy was somewhere in California. He was a pumpkin patch attendant. And so I just basically, I went from being very stuck in the studio. I was using a lot of lighting and really just trying to understand photography, because I was working on movies and I was starting to get more into photography, and I wanted to learn everything there is to know about lighting, metering. So I was using Aeroflex movie lights. I was using strobe lights. And it was a lot of trial and error and a lot of sort of backdrop portraiture. And I sort of, it helped me a lot to kind of go through those early technical stages. And, but once I hit the road and I'm just kind of documenting whatever I'm seeing, I really started to get that bug for being out on the road and kind of exploring these 3 fishermen, the one drinking beer. I don't even think they realized I was behind them with my huge 8x10 camera under the dark cloth. That guy was really sweet. But yeah, again, this was when you could buy fresh 8x10 Polaroid film for, you know, a couple $100 a box. And now, of course, on eBay, people are trying to sell it for as much as $1,500.
Yeah.
And it's not reliable because of the chemistry. It goes bad. That's in Yosemite. So this is all 2006, 2007. And again, my first time kind of being outside of a studio with wanting to kind of explore what's out there in mind. And I was hooked from that point on. Um, and then uh, and then I started shooting a bunch of black and white conventional film after that, and have since put in thousands of miles. But I think we can get into the black and white stuff a little bit later. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, so the 8x10 Polaroid California exposures were the first I'd ever made outside of a studio, out on the road. And I'm glad it was that film, because it yields really incredible results. And I hadn't seen a lot of large format Polaroids being exposed outside of studios, you know, outside of sort of controlled lighting situations. And it just rendered the landscape really nicely. And so I still have all those Polaroids, and they've some of them have been published over the last I don't know, 10 years or something like that. But and sadly, I never returned to it. Once I was hooked on being on the road, I thought, well, it's probably a little bit more economical to just get conventional films. So I went from 8x10 Polaroid, which is very cumbersome and very costly, to 35 millimeter black and white. It was a lot easier. But I'm glad I have those early 8x10s. And I still have quite a few boxes of it. And sadly, a lot of it is not usable. But I plan on getting out there at some point again and going through the remainder of my supply of 8x10 and just seeing what kind of results I can get, knowing that the chemistry is kind of dead and gone in a lot of that stuff. But it's a really beautiful, unique film, and it's sad that none of it's being made anymore. I think Fuji's done. Impossible Project is making some of the instant film, but the original Polaroid stuff is just, it's so beautiful, and it's just sad to see that it's gone, you know.
It absolutely is. And how did you first become interested in photography?
Oh, wow. Well, as Grant Britton, who's listening in, legendary skateboard photographer, he'll tell you that, you know, there's a lot of photography in skateboarding, and photographed by Grant and Spike Jones early on, and up in San Francisco, Gabe Morford and Tobin Yelland. The good fortune of having been photographed by some really important legendary skateboard photographers. I was around all of that in the skateboarding days. But I think, and Grant might understand this, I think when you're a skateboarder, you're so just kind of focused on the tricks and skating, and then the photographer's there documenting. And I didn't really understand what photography was. I didn't really get it. I knew that amazing things were happening, but there was just that divide between like the focus on the skating, and then the photographer. And then, of course, later when I got into photography, I was able to look back and really kind of understand how incredible these guys are, and what they were doing, and how they were able to capture skateboarding in such a cool, creative way, you know. And then when I started shooting Super 8 film for the first stereo video, Stereo Skateboards, my company, in 93, 94, I was really kind of hooked on that. So we incorporated a lot of Super 8 film into the first stereo video. And so I loved doing that, but I still I wasn't connecting with the photography thing. I was connecting with art and the visual arts and design and skateboard graphics and editing and stuff like that, but I didn't connect the photography thing yet. And then I got into acting, and I had been doing that for about 5 years. And then just kind of one day I was on a movie set, and I looked up and I saw the big Panavision 35 millimeter camera, and I was like, yeah, shit, I love cameras. And I hadn't really thought about them in a while. It was weird. I think I was just so focused on not wanting to be a shitty actor, that I wasn't really paying attention to what was going on around me, maybe enough. And then just that one day in 2002, maybe early 2002, I looked up at that big Panavision camera and I was like, God, that thing is beautiful. And then I just started talking to the crew guys, like, yeah, I used to shoot some Super 8 and I love film, and like, what kind of film are you using? And what's that light? And what's that light? And why does this light have a blue filter? And why does that one have an orange filter? And I just dove in. And that was a movie that was shooting up in Vancouver. So on my off day, I bought a Bolex 16 millimeter. And I bought a Mamiya RZ7, that Mamiya RZ7 medium format camera. And I just dove in and never looked back.
Look back. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Well, we're going to get into A Plain View, which was your second book, which you plan to do another printing of coming up,
Yeah,
right?
I think end of 2021, spring of 2022, if I can get my ducks in a row.
All right.
Yeah, this is all in early 2017 with a 4x5 camera and Kodak 4x5 color films. I roamed Texas over the course of about a month off and on when I was living in North Texas at the time. And I made about 300 exposures. I had been to Texas before on various photo road trips before that. And I knew of Highway 287, which is one of my favorite highways out there. And I thought, well, I live here now. I want to go roam the state. And it's a big state. And I absolutely loved it. And I loved the film choice. I was very drawn to Robbie Mueller's cinematography in the film Paris, Texas, which of course is a masterpiece. And Robbie Mueller is a phenomenal cinematographer. And so that was always in my mind when I was thinking about the Texas thing. And I knew that I would be able to find the feeling that you get when you watch Paris, Texas, those opening scenes of Travis walking through the desert and arriving in Terlingua. And so I knew that I wanted a color palette, but I knew that I wanted a certain kind of flatter, more muted, kind of subdued palette. And so you give the film some good overexposure. And I used an old 1941 Kodak Ektar uncoated 127 millimeter lens, and that gives it a nice flatness as well. And so I just kind of roamed Texas and ended up in many a small town that I'd never been to, and made a series of photos. And then eventually the next year put out a book called A Plain View. So it's been a couple of years now since that book came out. And these are some examples of the 4x5 photos from Texas. It's very, very, very quiet, very beautiful, empty, very cinematic little towns. A lot of places that resemble film locations or something you might see out of a film like Paris, Texas.
I know, it's amazing that you were able to photograph these places, and it's like there's sign of existing life somewhat, but there are not a lot of people around, not a lot of cars. So, I mean, have you gone to these places when you're on the road and then decided to change plans because it's just not what you expected? Or do you just kind of go with the flow? And
that's the beautiful thing about roaming America, is that you never know what to expect and it's never disappointing. There's always odd things like this bush tree growing around a street light, and a lawnmower just sitting there unattended with that beautiful bright John Deere green and yellow, and the red fence here matching the red truck in the suburbs of Denton, Texas, and this church with these 2 green house doors on it. And there's always those odd things that you see when you're kind of out there. This was a dusk shot in La Mesa, Texas. Just these empty street scenes at night, long exposures. A lot of that lens flare comes from the uncoated lens and the long exposure time. But yeah, just again, I can't speak enough to how enthusiastic I still am to this day for the road trip.
Yeah, you can tell you're very passionate about it. So who are some of the other photographers that have been an inspiration to you?
Well, I'm still pretty ignorant about, like, I don't have a huge photo book collection, but I had been given a William Christenberry book pretty early on, and that planted a seed for sure. He documented Alabama and its relics beautifully, Hale County, Alabama. And I knew that I liked his appreciation for these kind of things that remain standing. And in some cases, how the earth literally envelops them. Kristen Berry would shoot an old general store or an old brick building in the middle of nowhere in Alabama over the course of literally decades. And in the books, you see almost like a sequence, the building from the 70s, the building in the 2000s, and it's literally become enveloped. Nobody's bothered to knock it down. It becomes a part of the landscape, a part of the way we see the landscape, and we watch the earth kind of take it over. Kristen Berry, I was really moved by early on. And I had seen in 2007 Henry Wessel's work. He did a lot of great black and white American work between the East Coast and the West Coast, primarily the West Coast. And early on, it was like Wessel and Kristen Berry and Joel Sternfeld put out an amazing book called American Prospects in 1986. That's all 8x10, beautiful color photos of his travels around America. But I also really liked the rawness of Robbie Mueller, you know, and there's just a real sense of it's not really clean, you know. There's a kind of dirtiness to it, and there's a dustiness about Texas, and I think that old lens kind of served the landscape quite nicely in Texas. But yeah, those were sort of the three people I kind of knew about early on that got inside there towards the beginning.
And do you have, is there much planning involved when you're out on these road trips? Or are you just kind of getting in the car and going and just stopping when something strikes you?
Yeah, always just stopping when something strikes you. Just driving around this building I saw, rounding a corner and driving onto some other town. You kind of never know what's going to be around the corner, you know, and something just kind of pokes out and you stop. And in this case, pop the trunk and take the camera out on the tripod and set up and make an exposure and pack up and just keep driving. And you never really knowing. I mean, I you know, and then, you know, maybe you're driving for 10 hours in a day, and some days you make 6 exposures, some days you make 23 exposures, and you put in a lot of miles, and then you get to some random town, it's midnight, you're exhausted, you've been driving all day, you get some shitty gas station food, and then you check into some motel that likely has cockroaches under the bed. And you journal and write about the day and how many exposures you made. I mean, the whole process, and it's just exhilarating to me. And
that's part of the experience too, right? That makes it so exciting is going into those places that you wouldn't normally be in and looking for the things that you wouldn't normally be looking for.
I mean, it's very akin to the early skateboarding days of touring the country. And you know, you have your skateboard and you're very excited about being on the road, and you don't know where you're going to end up and what the towns are going to be like. And you get to the hotel and it's really exciting. And you go out that night, of course, looking for skate spots. Just being out on the road is just really exciting. And with photography now, it's kind of like an extension of, you know, all the skateboarding trips. And then before that, all the camping trips in the 70s, when we'd go from Orange County up to Shasta Lake and Redding and stuff and stay in cabins. And just early on, I have fond memories of road tripping and kind of being interested in just what's out there and in its beauty and its oddness, you know.
And so for this book, because this was your second book, so how do you know, or I guess what was the point where you were ready to put your work into a book? What was that process like for you?
I knew that I wanted to do a book with these, some of these photos. So that was in my head already. And then it just kind of came down to getting everything scanned and sitting at a computer for many weeks and starting to lay the thing out. And then start having it printed. We printed it in Dallas, Texas. I wanted to make sure that the book was printed in Texas.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I knew that I wanted to make a book of these photos, and I was happy that I did. But as anybody who's made books will tell you, it's definitely a daunting, overwhelming process.
Yeah,
to put a
I
book
can
together.
imagine it. When you're putting work into a book, does it change how you view your work?
Um, that's a good question. I mean, it depends on whether or not the book comes out exactly as you wanted it to.
Yeah.
You know, it's tricky. Any photographer will tell you, like any musician, everybody's, you put stuff out and, oh, maybe I should have put that photo on the left page and that one on the right. Um, and, um, and then, there's always, oh, does it look right? Does it feel, did I go with the right paper? There's always that stuff that torments you. But you just let it go, and you're hopefully happy with the overall result, and you move on to the next. But yeah, I was happy with the Texas book, and I was glad that I was able to get that out there.
That's great. I mean, like you said, it's a daunting process for many people. And did you edit and do everything on your own, or did you have someone that you worked with?
I always try to get input from friends and stuff. Yeah. And my wife,
Great.
For the Texas book, I printed out little digital 5x7 prints of mostly all the exposures, lay them all out in the living room on the floor, and like in a paper trail, and you just kind of walk around and go, oh, those look good together. And you go through that whole process. It takes so long. And then you whittle it all down and you scrutinize everything. And I mean, as Grant Britton will tell you, it's probably like laying out an issue of a magazine, it's a lot of work and a lot of scrutinizing and nitpicking and, hey, come over here. What do you think of this? But it's fun. It's really, really fun, but it's definitely daunting.
And then this is your third book, your most recent book, that is sold out, and hopefully you'll do possibly another printing of this book in the future. But it is sold out, and we're really excited to learn about this. And how is creating this book different than your Texas book?
It was more difficult for sure, because I tapped into, the black and white photos going back to 2008, like I was talking about earlier. After I had taken those original road trips with the big Polaroid films, the very next year in 2008, I started taking road trips and outside of California with black and white films. And so this book meant going into the drawers and tapping into 12 years of black and white film photos. And so I had a lot more to kind of whittle down from, thousands of black and white photos down to 84 as a kind of, it's selected American photographs. So it's kind of a sampling of some of the black and white work from a lot of the road trips over the years. And this one has medium format 6, 7, 6, 6, and 35. So there's a few different formats in there, but this spans New York State to Oregon. It's mostly west of the Mississippi, but there's a lot of it covers a lot of ground. So this book covers more ground and geographically than anything else I've put out.
Wow, well, the work is beautiful. I'm excited. I ordered a book, so I'm really excited for when it comes, so I can see what it's like. But it looks really beautiful.
Has it come yet? Come on now.
No, it has not. It hasn't come yet, but I'm excited. I got the notification that it was delayed, but I'm excited to get it. And so, well, I mean, I know that for a lot of photographers, they always wonder if when they get to the point where they feel they're ready to make a book, like, they don't know where to start. So do you have any advice on how to find a publisher, or what's the best way to kind of get started when someone's ready to go, down the book path?
Oh, geez. I don't know if my brain has that capacity right. I mean, you find your way. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean, I know that a lot of photographers use Blurb, and I think Blurb has really improved, and they make great books, and they have great quality. I mean, I know there's other services like that out there, but creatively speaking, I think if you're inspired by the work and you feel like you want people to see it, and you start to envision a kind of thread and these images might work together, or you have a certain series of photos from maybe one location or a kind of theme or one type of geography or something that starts to feel like it belongs in a set. That's usually a good sign, you know what I mean? And it starts to find itself, all the pieces start to come together. And then, you know, there's a lot of printers out there, and, you know, you use InDesign, lay the book out, and, you know, it's, there's a lot to it. But I think if you're inspired by the work and you feel like there's something there, there's no reason why everybody shouldn't be putting out zines and photo books. I think I don't think you have to be at a certain level or any of that junk. I think anybody who's passionate about photography and they want to share their work, publishing work or selling prints, making prints, you know, that's definitely important, especially with everything being on phones now.
Yeah.
To have tangible things and prints that you can frame and books that you can flip through. It's even more important now to make books. I've bought so many zines through Instagram and photo books, and there's so much out there, and it's really inspiring to see what people are doing even from home. I've bought homemade books that have been hand sewn. They've only made, you know, 30 copies, you know, using just home printers and people stapling books and doing creative things with it. I like to buy that stuff and collect it and support that because it's really important.
That's great. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, when we were looking at your Texas work for A Plain View, when you're going to these towns and you're traveling through, you're on a road trip and you're photographing, do you ever interact with the people there and kind of talk to them, or you just kind of keep to yourself and do your thing?
I mean, most of the time I'm not seeing a lot of people, as you can see in my photos. Most of the time you don't really see many people. Like this intersection, there might be a car passing or somebody on a bicycle. There was nobody on this sidewalk as I was driving by and snapped that quick photo. This guy I caught right before he was going into the post office. I think he might be, you know, one of 3 people in the book or whatever. This was literally an empty carnival. These really beautiful empty towns with this great old kind of American small town architecture, empty rodeo, empty lot. You know, there's a lot of kind of quiet emptiness. I love the architecture of these kind of houses that you find. Just these empty streets. There's something very appealing about that to me. But occasionally you do run into some people. That's in Northern California. Those clouds were, and that's it also in Northern California. That's with a beautiful film called Rolly Retro 80. Beautiful film. And that's with a Nikon 28 Ti point and shoot camera. People, people definitely should give credit to the point and shoot cameras because there's some good ones out there. That's in Colorado. That's in Colorado as well. Just a movie theater that never got finished. That's just in the middle of nowhere. These houses that just pop up in the middle of nowhere with nothing but dirt and grass around them. There's just a lot of weird scenes out there that I'm really interested in. But anyway, yeah, I think when I do run into people and there is conversation, it's usually relating to the camera, especially when I have one of the big cameras and I'm under a dark cloth, you know, like the old timey days, you know.
Awesome.
You'll come up and be like, wow, what the hell is that thing? They still make film for that? You know, I always love that conversation. This is all in the in Griffith Park area. When I used to live up in Los Feliz, we used to take our neighborhood walks, you know, a lot. And I had that Nikon 28 Ti, and I was just kind of just on walks with the stroller and the family, just snapping photos of where we lived. And this is when we'd hike up to the observatory. And so I wanted to include kind of every possible variety of the landscape that might be found, you know, in America. And it ends on that MacArthur Park photo. And at the beginning of the book, it starts with a natural body of water, and at the end, it ends with a man-made body of water. And you sort of meander through the various landscapes in between, from the desert and the suburbs and So it's kind of a variety of what you can kind of see in the American landscape, from the mountains to the city.
And this book, that your recent book that you just finished, you did this whole thing over the last year, like during the pandemic, right? You worked with somebody from afar, and with Stanley Barker, and I mean, I can only imagine that process is so difficult, as you mentioned already. But from a distance, how was it for you? I mean, did everything go as planned, or was it more difficult? Did you have a hard time with that, not being there in person all the time to see everything?
Yeah, ideally you want to be on press so that you can see the sheets coming off the printer and sort of okay everything. That could not be the case here. The book was printed at EBS in Verona, Italy. Beautiful. They do amazing photo books. They've done many photo books. So I knew that they knew what they were doing. And Gregory and Rachel of Stanley Barker, they make really stunning books. So I knew I was in good hands, but I'm still very specific. Annoyingly so sometimes, unfortunately, but sometimes it takes that to get the thing. Faith in Stanley Barker and in EBS, I made match prints. And that's a really important part of the process. You make your match prints, you get everything where you want them, where you want the images to be. And I sent those to London, and then they sent those to Italy. And then so as the sheets are coming off the press, they're able to reference my match prints and make sure everything was good. But it goes through the process of, scanning and editing, and then making your match prints, and then sending the files to London, and then Flow Photographic. They do amazing work. They did the duotone separations, and then the match prints went to Italy, and then thankfully it all kind of came together nicely. But yeah, it's a lot of moving parts to make a photo book, for sure.
It's definitely a commitment. And do you have, I mean, what are your plans for the future? Do you have other road trips planned, or like what are you focusing on right now?
Well, I did get to spend a couple of weeks in Galveston, Texas. It's a little island off of Houston. And in all my Texas travels, I had never gone to Galveston. I had never been there. And I was contacted by the Galveston Historical Foundation to go to Galveston and document the island for a book that's due out in the summer. So I'm fast at work on sequencing that book now. So I'm getting a little too far ahead of myself. But no, Galveston was great. And I did 4x5 there, and black and white 35 millimeter. And so hopefully that book comes out in July. So there's that'll be keeping me busy for the next however many months. And then once that's done, I'm sure I'll be back on the road at some point, because I can't not do that.
And you, I read also that you took your son with you on one of your trips, right?
He's been on a few of the trips. Two of my two boys, yeah. The eldest and the youngest, they've both, last year, my then 7-year-old, and then he was 8 after that, we did a couple of road trips between LA and Texas, and I let him use my Nikon 28 Ti, and I gave him a bag of Kodak Portra 400, and in those 2 road trips, he shot, I think, probably 25 rolls of film. And I would say, you do that thing where it's like, it's film, it's not a phone. And so there's money involved with processing or whatever, scanning and all that stuff, to see the images and all that. So you want to kind of go, whoa. And then there's also the parent thing that kicks in, where you're like, no, don't. And then I learned very fast to go, well, I want to see what he sees. You know? And so I just let him shoot, and I'd watch him, and I'd go, why does he want to shoot that? And I'd go, oh, I see. Okay. And then he started turning the camera and going vertically, because there would be a pole there or some vertical structure. And he realized kind of on his own that if he goes this way, it's going to cut a lot of it off. So he started going like this. And that was really, really cool. But before that, with my eldest son, one of the road trips, we did a road trip from LA to Oregon, and he would have been about 5 or 6. And some of the photos in the new black and white book were shot on that road trip. And so there's also just those great memories of looking at the photos and remembering a time that I was on a road trip with my 5-year-old son at the time, who's now 17. And I have his photos in sleeves that he shot on that road trip with a little point and shoot camera.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really fun to do that with the kids.
That is so great. And it's great too that, because I'm sure going out on the road is probably a difficult thing to do for some time away from family. So it's neat that they can come and experience that with you as well.
For sure. Yeah, it's great. And
Really cool.
seeing if they're into it, and seeing what they see.
And so do you shoot many portraits ever?
I used to do more. There was a magazine called Anthem magazine that was around for a while. I was doing some photos for them for some issues. And I think all of the photos that I shot of people that ran in that magazine were all shot with Polaroid film, if I'm not mistaken. 8x10 and smaller Polaroid films. But yeah, I was just so hooked on that Polaroid stuff. Yeah, so that was kind of, it's been a while since I've done like portraits and stuff like that, but certainly some great memories doing that during that time.
And I love that you tend to go back to previous locations and photograph them again. Like, for example, like the gas station lights, that we actually shared some of those images from you on social. So tell me about that when you go back and how you decide to go back to these places and what it's like for you when you do.
Well, I've been back and forth between LA and Texas probably about, I'm going to say 8 times or so over the last 12 years. And it just became a thing where I would always go to the same places, the same diners. There's an amazing restaurant in Seligman, Arizona, off Old Route 66 called West Side Lilo's Cafe. They make the best cornbread, and you put the local Arizona honey on it. It's so good. If you go there, ask for Erica. Erica is a really lovely, sweet server at West Side Lilo's. She was there on my very first road trip from LA to Texas in 2008, and she's still there today. And that the gas station lights are in Seligman, just a little bit down the road from West Side Lilo's. But it just becomes that thing when you're going back and forth and wanting to kind of see what something looks like a year later or 2 years later or whatever that is. So the gas station lights, I have exposures of that from 2008 as recently as 2019. So there's an 11-year separation between my first and last exposure of those old service station lights. And I've seen it sort of change and kind of not change, but it's always fun to just kind of at the very least see what things look like now. And they're just like landmarks to you. They sort of become landmarks and reminders of the last road trip. And you start to feel a sense of kind of familiarity, It's interesting to see how things change. Some things are no longer there. Some things, even in Texas, there's a shot of the old Scott Theater in Odessa. They've torn that down. Yeah, so things change, and sometimes, and this is what makes it all interesting to me, is sometimes nothing changes at all. Like the Christenberry stuff, the only thing that changes is time and the Earth's influence over these man-made structures. But sometimes it takes a long time for the dilapidation process, and you get to see those changes over time. I think it's interesting.
And I can see a little irony in some of the shots that you do, like with the little kind of bits of humor of like the limousine, like we just saw in front of that house. So, just wow, what's the story behind that? I want to know why this person has this limo there. And
yeah, it's strange. It's strange. I love that shot there in Texas. Can you go back to that, Steve? Is that possible? the white car. Maybe Steve left us. Anyway, I rolled into Amarillo, and that's the first thing that poked out here. I was on the other side there driving on the road, and I see this white car against that white building, and then that little splash of red with the ashtray there. And I look closer and I see that one of the bumper stickers reads, "God bless John Wayne," and the other reads Trump. And I was like, yes. Just so funny. I mean, that looks like something out of True Stories. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the Talking Heads film True Stories that came out in the 80s that David Byrne narrates. It takes place in a fictional small Texas town. It's also got a great color palette. That car and just that vibe reminded me of the kind of irony in True Stories.
That's so great. Well, if it's okay with you, can we get to some of the audience questions? Because we're getting lots of questions, and I do feel like we should get to some of them for them, if that's okay.
Oh, that's totally fine.
Okay, great. So let's see.
For letting me ramble for so long.
No, I love. Well, I don't really want to stop. But I feel like we want to address some of these.
It's all good.
So does music influence your still photography?
Yes, at the very least, it influences the mood when you're driving around. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I take that stuff pretty seriously. I mean, and then listening to music certainly relentlessly when you're editing and stuff and working on a book. Absolutely, music and movies.
What kind of music though?
Oof. I mean, if I'm, there's a lot of Neil Young. There's always Bob Dylan. And then I'll switch over to Muddy Waters, Miles Davis, a lot of jazz, and then a lot of kind of folk stuff. You know, on the Texas road trips, I was listening to Tom Rush a lot. And I was listening to Whiz Jones. I don't know if anybody knows who Whiz Jones is. And, you know, Bert Jansch and John Renbourn and a lot of that kind of British folk music, the British guitar music from the 60s and stuff. But yeah, usually like kind of depressing guitar music, really.
To get you
and Miles Davis, you know, and yeah, and sometimes I'll listen to see what's on the local radio or whatever. Yeah.
That's great. Okay, so what are some of the early mistakes you made within photography which shaped your career?
I don't think there's any mistakes in photography for anyone, you know, or any mistakes in skateboarding. I mean, Grant Britton will probably tell you we would all look back on how we dressed in the 80s as being one enormous universal mistake. Right?
Yeah,
like we get to look back on that and laugh and, you know, find the humor and the irony in it and all of that stuff. I don't think there's any mistakes because you have to go through whatever you're going through until you get to where you want to be. And so I burned a shit ton of film in the early days, as I'm sure Grant did. Like, why is he backlit? What the hell? What did I do wrong? And, you know, you go through all kinds of trial and error, but it all amounts to something ultimately in the end, if you continue doing it, you know?
Absolutely. And I mean, I like that you say there are no mistakes because it's experimental and it makes you grow and you're learning and evolving in your career. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
So one other person asked, it's interesting to see people as the focus in your early work and then the absence of them in your more recent work. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, that's mainly the people early on were like, you know, set up kind of portraits and stuff like that for a purpose, for an article in the magazine and stuff like that. For this stuff, again, a lot of these places are void of people, or you might see somebody walking in and out of a gas station or something. And I'm always pretty distant, and I'm always looking at the scenes and the atmosphere. And again, a lot of these places, there's just not a lot of people. I mean, I've done the thing where I've been around downtown a lot, New York City, and that's always fun to kind of be in the pulse of the humanness of life, that side of it, and all that movement and chaos. But for me, I just kind of prefer the quietness and just being out there and having a pulling back the camera a little bit and the sense of space and atmosphere. This empty parking lot that's somewhere in Texas. Yeah, that's just kind of what I'm drawn to. That kind of emptiness. It's nice.
That's awesome. Well, oh, somebody's asking about what's your favorite skateboarding shot of yourself, and can you tell us the story behind it?
Geez, that's a really good question.
Unfortunately, we won't be able to pull it up right away, but you can probably share it. I can send it out to all the attendees tomorrow if we can find it.
I honestly, I wouldn't be able to say. I don't know. Oh, the screen just changed.
Oh yeah, it did. I'm not sure what happened with that.
The old slideshow went away.
It did. I think did we lose Steve?
I think we did lose Steve temporarily, but he does have the link, so he'll hop back on and just open the slideshow right back up once he's on.
Is he still alive? Is he okay?
Okay.
Are you there, Steve? You with us?
It just be a connectivity issue here.
Okay, good. And then someone is asking.
I can't say. I can't remember all of them. It's too hard to say which would be the favorite. No.
Understandable.
You doing, Grant?
Unmute yourself, Grant.
What's this, Grant?
It would be O or Spike. They took some great ones of you.
They amazing guys, yeah. But then there was also like in the Stereo days, the San Francisco days. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff up there that I'm.
Luke.
Huh?
Luke Ogden.
Yeah, Luke Ogden. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. I see Grant.
I remember the Spike ones the most, though. The Spike ones were great.
Yeah, Spike. Yeah, he did a lot of. He started shooting BMX first, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
BMX and then skating. Yeah.
He was on the dark side.
The dark side.
Speaking of the dark side, I have a question. One person's asking, what kind of advice would you give somebody if they're moving from digital to film?
Moving from digital to film, I don't know. Grant would probably be able to answer that better, but I've not done digital, so I don't really know how that works. And I'm not saying that in a way at all to talk down on digital. I just don't know the technology. I mean, I understand that you can tell the sensor that you want it to react like 800 speed film, and so it might be a little bit grainier or whatever. But I really don't know how the whole sensor thing works. But I don't know, what would I say, Grant? I would just say to probably get some kind of 35 millimeter SLR, because most people shooting digital shoot DSLRs. So it's basically the same kind of body with the mirrors and all of that stuff. And the lenses are all relatively the same, right? And I guess if it's 400 speed film, start out setting your film, your ISO dial to 400 and shooting it maybe the way you would shoot digitally, somewhere along those lines, right?
Digital's easier.
Huh?
Digital's easier.
Yeah.
And cheaper.
Yeah.
Than film.
Yeah.
Film, you just don't know what you're going to get till you get it. You know?
Especially at the beginning, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, especially at the beginning.
But it's interesting because I was listening to an interview with you, Jason, and someone was asking you about what you described, the difference between like digital and film. Mm-hmm. And I loved the example you used was a piano and a synthesizer comparison. Like a piano sounds like a piano, but a synthesizer will never quite sound like a piano.
Yeah, and that again isn't meant to be a dismissive of it.
No, it's just a difference.
You know, the weight, the tangibility, the feel of the thing. It's, you know, that might be preferable to some people.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, a piano does fill up a room with analog sound, with a mechanical sound. It can fill a room, you know, there's a distinct flavor to a piano. A synthesizer can sound exactly like a piano, but I don't know that it is.
Doesn't feel the same. I mean,
In
I feel like that would.
manufacture, I don't think it is actually a piano, you know? So
Yeah.
there's just something, you know, it's not to say I'm not hoity-toity about the film thing. I'm not one of those film snobs. It's just what I like and what I started with, you
And
know?
what you love, yeah.
I tend to like a tangibility in things. And that's just for me, you know?
It kind of reminds me of like our daughter has gotten really into records lately, and she has a record player, and it's like the sound of listening to a record where there's that little kind of staticky kind of sound in the beginning. It's not quite like the same if you're listening to a CD or a tape, or it's missing something different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nostalgic too. There's something kind of cool about the old way of doing things.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, you want younger people to understand that things used to be a different way. And just because something is old or outdated does not mean it's worse. You know,
Exactly.
a good vinyl record will sound better than anything digital 500 years from now. It doesn't, something real and tangible is being played with a real and tangible record. You know, it is what it is, you know. It's a good record is really incomparable, you know.
I agree completely. Well, someone's asking, what is your go-to camera every day?
I mean, it depends on what I'm doing and where I'm going and all of that. But the Leica M6, I use that a lot, but not as much as some people use their M6s. Mamiya 7, which is a great 6x7 rangefinder camera. The Nikon 28 Ti Olympus XAs. I love point and shoot cameras. Grant probably has some. They're great and they yield amazing results. You know, you don't need an $8,000 Leica lens. You just don't need that. You don't need, you know what I mean? If you've got a you know, a decent lens and a little on a pocket camera, you're going to get great results. A lot of this stuff in the black and white book, that shot of the trains right there, that's a point and shoot camera. That's my Mamiya C330. I think Grant has a C220. I love that this is also like part discussion with Grant Britton. I love that. It's a square format twin lens reflex camera. I use that a lot. Yeah, I would say like the point and shoot cameras, and then the medium format cameras, and then sometimes the Leica M6, and then sometimes 4x5. But any point and shoot camera, any decent point and shoot camera that you can literally keep in your pocket, the batteries last forever, couple rolls of film in your pocket, you're golden. You don't need to buy crazy expensive gear.
Well, and so when you first started out, I mean, did you pretty much just kind of learn everything through experiments, or did you actually work with somebody or kind of have somebody in your life that I know you were asking a lot of questions about cameras and how things worked, but you just kind of dove in, it seems like, and just went for it.
Reading books and asking questions literally at like Sammy's camera, like that nerd, you know, like, hey, have you guys ever tried to push Portra 400 film? Like, what did you guys get? What kind of results? Like, you know, but there was online. I mean, this is before Instagram and all that stuff, but online, just looking stuff up online, reading books, and shooting, and just experimenting. And then being on set. And because you talk to cinematographers and they tend to know film really well. Yeah. And lighting and stuff like that. And that's what I was interested in right at the beginning, was like trying to mimic movie lighting. And with, you know, I just wanted to understand all of that stuff, and later kind of shed all of that for natural lighting. But that early stuff was important to do, you know. So it was a lot of crew people on sets and stuff, picking their brains. And you go through all those motions, and it's really exciting.
That's awesome. Well, we really appreciate just being able to chat with you, and you being so incredibly generous with your time. Do you have any kind of words of wisdom for people that are struggling to kind of stay in that creative space right now with everything happening? And how do you do that for yourself?
That's a really good question. I mean, I guess the easy answer is no matter what, you just have to, you know, um, you just have to find something to do, whatever that is to do. I mean, personally, in this era, this age, I find what really helps is I I try to be as disciplined as I can with less phone use. I I tend to personally feel like the more I'm kind of relying on that as a way to pass time, it kind of starts to infiltrate you. You know what I mean? So I tend to sort of try to put that down and remember that I have books at home and anything to do to stay engaged and inspired is really, really important. You know, flipping through those books, finishing that book that you started reading that you just are too lazy to finish reading, or whatever it is. For me, it's just staying engaged in the photography thing, making the books, looking at photos, looking at photo books, watching movies, reading, just trying to stay ahead of the, you know, with my head above water a little bit. You, whatever it is, whatever it takes, you just have to stay inspired. You have to stay motivated in some way. Otherwise, you just kind of start to sink. And I've been there personally where you just kind of feel sluggish and you have to kind of snap out of it. But now's the time, I think, to be as busy as we can be, you know?
Yeah. No, well, that's really inspiring because I know a lot of people struggle with, especially creatively, and trying to kind of, depending on what type of photography that they're, involved in, is like trying to what's the next best thing that I can do, and how do I do it, and always trying to kind of grow and evolve in their career. And sometimes people feel stuck.
Yeah, I think maybe, you know, I would say to answer that, I don't know that there's always a next best thing. You know what I mean? I don't think there has to be necessarily. As long as there's motivation and enthusiasm, you know, for what you're doing, I don't think it needs to be like, what's my next big project? How can I outdo myself? I mean, you want to grow, but you're going to grow organically if
Yeah.
you're enthusiastic about what you're doing. I don't think you have to reach too far to outdo yourself. And if you don't get to this huge thing, you're going to be bummed. Just staying enthusiastic about what you do and continuing to do that, no matter what, it's good. Those next steps are going to just organically find themselves, you know?
Yeah, no, I love that I love that. Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I'm checking in to see if anybody has any final questions for Jason.
Everybody's already bored and they've already left the room. It's all good. I totally get it.
No, everyone is really saying lots of positive things and thank you and how inspirational you are. And actually, the skating community is so strong and supportive. A couple of people that have signed up for tonight were complimenting you and saying how inspirational you were for them, because they went from skating into some form of art as well, whether it be photography or painting.
Mhm.
And so you've been a real inspiration to them, which I think is really great.
I mean, look, I'll say that, as Grant will attest to, I'm sure, skateboarding is the best thing to ever happen to every single skateboarder. I'm not an actor without it. I'm not a photographer without it. You know, it's the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. I owe everything to skateboarding. And so yeah, it's really nice to hear that. I mean, skateboarding is, it's kind of where you learn everything. And I was around at the right time to know incredibly important people like Mark Gonzalez, who I called our skateboarding's Bob Dylan. You know, he's the ultimate artist, character, mind, innovator, you know, and everybody was following in his footsteps. And I don't think I would have known about Neil Young and John Coltrane and these musicians and folk artists and stuff as early as I did without guys like Mark Gonzalez. So the skateboarding community is just, it's beyond special. So all kinds of seeds that are still growing were planted in the skateboarding days. So it's always nice to hear that from skateboarders.
Yeah, it's been really great. I mean, it sounds like, because it's such an individual thing too, that you know, when you're skateboarding, you're learning, you're failing, you're getting hurt, you're getting back up, you're doing it again.
Yep.
That drive that you had to have to pursue that had to have been, well, it's, you can see that it's been a guiding force for you with your work, because you've accomplished so much. I mean, you 3 books, you're on to the next, you're going to move on to another one, you're traveling, you're still very passionate about what you're doing, and it is very inspiring. So thank you for talking with us
Thank
tonight.
you so much. I appreciate that, Wendy.
Appreciate it. Do you have any final kind of like words of wisdom for our listeners tonight?
I think I kind of, hopefully I was articulate enough to where I was, people could understand me, but just the inspiration point, the perseverance, the sticking with it, I think is the most important thing. And to your point about the failing in skateboard, I mean, that certainly helps with that. It helped me, you know, the idea of continuing. I mean, skateboarding is brutal, as Grant will tell you, you know. Skateboarders nowadays, it takes them sometimes 3 days to do something, to slide a big handrail for a video or something, and they break their back literally in the process of getting it, you know, but they just never let up. I think it's really cool. But yeah, just the passion point and staying consistent with your enthusiasm for what you're doing. That's the most important thing. Absolutely.
Well, that's great advice, and thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I'm really grateful, and again, thank you for helping us raise funds for the Gordon Parks Foundation with donating your prints and just everything that you've done. We really appreciate it so much.
Gordon Parks Foundation. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Well,
thank you,
yeah, thank you so much. Well, have a good night. Bye, Carol.
Bye, Mom.
Bye. Nice to meet you.
You guys.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you so much for your support. Good night.